By Mr. Brockler, Ms. Pearson, Mr. Orman, Ms. Tish McGuire, and Mr. Edson. The record should reflect that we are outside the presence of the jurors. One of the jurors indicated to my staff that she needs to talk to me about a potential media incident. I'm not sure what that means, and pursuant to my instructions, my staff stopped her and told her not to say any more. So I'm going to bring her in at this time. It is juror number 706. Good morning. The record should reflect that juror number 706 is now present in the courtroom. It's my understanding that you wanted to talk to me about something.
Well, as I came up the ramp from security, or after going through security, and then where it opens up, and before you get to the bank of elevators, on the right-hand side, there's usually people standing around. And there's this tall fella. I've seen him once before. He's tall and slender, wears a suit, and he's a little unshaven. Looks good on him. And he had a different badge on. I think it was a little red. And I tried to see what it said, and I thought it said media. Now, I'm not 100% sure, but as I'm approaching, he had been looking at me, and as I'm approaching, he slides behind the other three people that were standing there. But like I said, I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. And this was after you had parked today or before?
Oh, it's after I had parked. It was after I'd gone through security.
You had already gone through security. You were already in the courthouse.
Yes,
Okay.
and I had come up the narrow ramp from security going toward the door that we go through for our first meeting area.
Okay, I understand now.
Yes.
But this person that you think may have had a badge that said media, he did not try to talk to you or ask
Oh,
you
no.
anything?
No, actually, I felt like he was trying to maybe avoid me because as I am getting closer, he stepped behind the other three, and I could not see his badge. I saw his badge. The distance was probably from here to the wall.
So about 10, 15 feet, something like that?
Yeah.
15 feet maybe? Okay, maybe
Yeah.
20. All right.
15
All right, well,
feet, it
15
sounds
feet.
good.
Yeah, all right. Thank you very much for letting us know. The media are allowed to be in the courthouse.
Right.
As long as he didn't talk to you or didn't try to ask you any questions, I'm comfortable that no order was violated, but
Right.
I appreciate you letting us know.
Yes, and I didn't know if it was okay for them to be there and to look for jurors so that they could recognize us later on.
Well, do you think that that's what he was doing? Was he
I don't
looking-
know. I
Okay.
have no idea. That's why I thought, well, maybe I should mention it.
Okay.
And I wasn't really sure if I should or shouldn't. And I thought, well, better be on the safe side.
No, and I appreciate you telling me
Okay.
that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. The record should reflect that juror number 706 has now exited the courtroom. I'm assuming that people are not asking me to make any additional record, correct?
No, sir.
All right, and I'm assuming it's the same from the defense. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. Mr. King, did you have a chance to review the motion that was filed by the media petitioners yesterday? You said you wanted a little time to think about it, and I think I gave you until today. Do you have a position as to whether I allow the media to have the admitted exhibits that do not show up well on camera? Ms. Nelson?
Yes, Your Honor, I did have an opportunity to review the case last night, and we do object. Our reading, I don't know if pushing this button helps.
Yes, that does help. Thank you.
Our reading of the motion was, as Mr. King said yesterday, that it's actually broader than just these exhibits. Our understanding was that the media was providing the exhibits, the photographs of the exhibits that they provided to the court by means of demonstrating some examples of some exhibits that are difficult to see from the CCTV feed, and that they're asking the court to reconsider its original ruling on C-93, denying their request to have access to all of those exhibits.
Do you have any objection to me releasing just the exhibits that have been admitted that do not show up well on screen?
Yes, we do, because we think that this is going to result in multiple requests, repeated requests about exhibits of all different kinds and all different sorts, and this is going to turn into a major distraction for the court and for the parties to have to continue to respond to these requests repeatedly. And so we continue to object, and we incorporate by reference all of the points and authorities and arguments that we made in our original response to C-193. So yes, we do object, Judge.
Okay. To the extent that this is a motion to reconsider my prior ruling, and to the extent that that request includes exhibits that have not been admitted, it is denied. To the extent that it includes or it refers to exhibits that have been admitted that are not visible on screen, the request is granted. And so what I'll do is, from now on, if there's an exhibit admitted and it is a type of exhibit that is not, that doesn't show up well on camera, we'll plan on providing that, a copy of that to the media so that they can have it because it doesn't show up well on camera. If the parties at any point have any objection, they have to let me know. I'm not intending to have a process where we're going to have a motion filed each time or a request made each time, and we're going to have argument each time. I think the documents that don't show up well on camera are the ones that have written material on them. Those are the ones that I'm talking about. Okay, Mr. Orman.
Thank you. Actually, you sort of.
Thank you, Ms. Tisch-McGuire.
It's Mr. Edson, really.
Oh, Mr.
Thank you,
Edson,
Your Honor.
thank you.
You sort of answered my question because I was going to inquire as to how that differentiation would be made. I do note Mr. Zansberg, who filed the motion, is here this morning, and I don't know if the court wanted to hear from him at all.
I appreciate him being here. My mind is made up. I reviewed the motion. I'm comfortable with the way I'm ruling, so that's how we're going to do it. Yes.
And, Your Honor, based on that, I'd just like to supplement the record a little bit. Our concern is that if the court's going to be doing this now going forward and there aren't going to be specific requests made for specific exhibits, we're not going to know exactly when to object. There may be some exhibits that we have different arguments about the media getting a hold of, and we are going to need to know which exhibits have been released to the media to publish in whatever fashion they see fit. So.
Okay, I've ruled. Let's bring the jury in. Thanks. The record should reflect that the jury is back in the courtroom now. Please be seated, everyone. Good morning, members of the jury. Good morning. How's everybody doing? Good. I know that one of you has a flight to catch tonight, and so we're going to end early today. If you would please let my staff know what's the latest we can end, then we'll plan to end at that time, okay? Before I forget, as I mentioned before, we've gotten lunch for you this week. Next week, plan ahead because you have to provide for your own lunch. So whether you want to bring your lunch or get lunch in the cafeteria here, or you want to go out and get lunch while you're here, any of those options is fine. You just have to plan accordingly, okay? All right, great. Let's see. Who is your next witness, Ms. Pearson?
Your Honor, the people call Officer Jason Oviatt.
Good morning. Morning. You solemnly swear or affirm on a penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay, please be seated. Could you please tell us your full name and spell your first and last names?
My name is Jason Oviatt, Jason Oviatt.
Ms. Pearson, you may proceed.
Officer Oviatt, who do you work for?
I work for the Aurora Police Department
How long have you worked for them?
since May of 2006.
Did you work in law enforcement prior to joining the Aurora Police Department?
Yes, I worked for about 3.5 years in 2 different agencies in New Mexico.
What are your duties at the Aurora Police Department?
I work patrol, which means that I'm primarily responsible for handling calls for service.
Were you working on July 20th of 2012?
Yes, I was.
What shift were you working at that time?
I was working a graveyard shift, which starts at 10 p.m. and goes until 8 a.m.
Had you come on at 10 p.m. on July 19th?
Yes.
Did you hear a call during your shift asking for responsive officers to the Century 16 Theater?
Yes, I did.
Do you recall what time that call came out?
That was about 5 midnight.
What was the nature of the call?
The call was of a shooting at the theater.
Was it a call directed to you, to a particular car, or for more than one vehicle to come?
It was directed to multiple cars. I was not one of the officers who was originally dispatched to the call.
Where were you at the time?
I was at 6th and Laredo at the time.
How did you get to the theater?
I drove from 6th over to Sable and then Sable down to the theater.
Do you know how long it took you to get there?
Only a couple of minutes.
When you arrived, where did you park?
When I arrived, I didn't want to navigate the parking lot because it's a fairly complicated lot with lots of medians and curbs in it. So I just drove south on Sable until I was next to the theater, and then I drove up over the curb and parked on the lawn.
Which side of the theater were you approaching from?
The east side.
And is that the front or the back of the theater?
That's the back of the theater.
When you first came up the lawn, what could you see?
When I came up onto the lawn, there was other officers that were arriving in other parts of the parking lot, and there was on the east corner of the building. There was Officer Sweeney was there, and there were 2 people who were bleeding that were at the corner of the building.
And could we have photo 4740 up on the screen that's been previously admitted? And do you recognize that as the theater?
Yes.
Now, there's a pointer that's on the kind of the half wall behind you. And do we have the wireless mic as well?
It's right here to your left, sir.
And if you could use the pointer to show us where you came up and parked when you were approaching the Century 16 Theater.
I parked in this area here.
And then you went across the grass.
Yes.
Where did you first see people?
On this corner of the building, right by the corner of the building itself, up on the sidewalk.
What did you see there?
There were two people that were, they were bleeding on the corner there, and that's where Officer Sweeney was standing.
Now, you indicated that other officers were arriving. Do you recall where they were?
Yes, most of the other officers that were arriving came in through the parking lot up here, so they were in this area. There probably would have been a number of them on the front of the theater, but I couldn't see them. But there were officers around here.
Other than Officer Sweeney, were there any other officers on the back of the theater?
No, on the back of the theater, the only officer that I could see was Officer Sweeney. I was aware that there were others, but I didn't see anyone else.
So when you saw Officer Sweeney, what did you do?
Officer Sweeney and I started to make our way this direction along the back of the theater, looking for a way to get inside.
What did you see as you were walking down that sidewalk there?
While I was walking down the sidewalk, there was blood along the sidewalk leading back towards the theater.
Did you know if that was from the people that you were seeing on the corner?
I didn't know.
Did you follow the trail of blood?
Yes.
Why did you do that?
We were looking for a way to get into the theater where, at the time, I thought that there was someone still shooting inside the theater. We were looking for a way to get inside and stop the threat.
Now, were you walking, strolling down the sidewalk?
No, we were running. It wasn't like a sprint. We didn't have a clear destination in mind. I didn't know that I was going to a particular door. We were looking for the suspect. We were looking for someone shooting, so we were moving as quickly as you can while you're sort of looking around and processing that information.
As you were going down the sidewalk, did you see anything else besides the people on the corner and the trail of blood?
Yes, there was a car parked right here, white two-door.
And you're pointing into what would be the first space behind, there's some complex, something there in the center we can see on the map?
Yeah, the first parking space here. This is sort of a gravelly area that's behind the doorway, and this is the first parking space next to it.
Okay, you can go ahead and take a seat. Now, you said that you saw a car parked in that first space by the dumpster, or by that dumpster complex. What color was the car?
It was a white car.
At the time, did you know where that was located in relationship to the numbered theaters inside the complex?
No, I didn't.
Did you later learn what theater is basically in front of where that car was?
Yes.
And what theater is that?
That's the doorway to Theater 9 is located right next to where that car was.
When you saw that car, did you see anyone standing near it?
Yes.
Describe what you saw.
There was a person standing on the opposite side of the car from me. He was dressed in black and wearing a tactical helmet and a gas mask, and at first I thought that he was another officer.
Now, you said he was standing on the opposite side of the car, so where was he standing?
So he would have been standing on the driver's side of the car, since the car was in the parking space, sort of parked head in. He was standing on the opposite side, close to where the driver was, or to where the driver door was.
And could you see part of him then above the roof line of the car?
Yes, so I could see essentially from his shoulders up.
And what did you see that he was wearing?
He was wearing like a tactical helmet and a gas mask.
Now, you initially said you thought that he was a police officer?
Yes.
Why did you think that?
We were, while we were responding to the call, there were other officers that were on scene and inside the theater that were calling for gas masks because some kind of gas had been used inside the theater itself. So initially seeing someone there in the gas mask and tactical gear, he just at first glance looked like another cop to me.
At the time that you noticed him, were there any other people around him outside of the theater?
There were none that I knew of at the time. I learned of one later.
But you didn't see, there weren't victims pouring out of the back door at that point?
No.
Did you continue towards this car and the person that was next to the car?
I did. Initially, I wasn't so much continuing towards the car as I was following the blood that was along the sidewalk and looking for a way to get into the theater, and that was the same direction that the car was going, but originally the car and this person weren't the goal that I was moving towards.
Did you think that the blood trail would lead you to a door?
Yes.
As you got closer to the car and to the person, and I presume all of this is happening pretty rapidly.
Yes.
As you got closer to the car and to the person by the car, what did you start to think about?
As I got closer to the car, I noticed that the person behind the car wasn't acting like a cop. All of the other officers that were on scene they were all trying to find a way to get into the building, or there was a lot of radio traffic for people that had found victims and were trying to notify the fire department of where people needed help. But everybody was going there trying to get in and deal with the shooting. Everybody was urgently doing something, and this person was just very relaxed standing by the car, not really doing anything at all.
What did that say to you?
That said to me that he wasn't an officer, and given that he was wearing a gas mask at the theater where gas had been used before or during a shooting, I knew that he had to be involved in the shooting.
As you got closer to him, did you notice anything about the gear that he was wearing?
The gear that he was wearing wasn't actually police gear. If I had had a clearer view of him to begin with, then maybe I would not have thought he was an officer. It wasn't like he was wearing a uniform. He was just wearing tactical gear. So it did become clear that he wasn't.
How far away from him were you when you realized he's not a police officer and he's probably the suspect?
About 20 feet.
At the time that you made that realization, what was he doing?
He was sort of leaning up against the car, like he was resting his arms on the car, really not doing much of anything.
What did you do?
I pointed my gun at him.
And where was Officer Sweeney at that time?
Officer Sweeney was just behind me and to the left. And
At the time that you pointed your gun at the person that was by the car, do you know what Officer Sweeney was doing? Did you see what he was doing?
I didn't see what he was doing. As I was pointing my gun at Officer Sweeney, I heard Officer Sweeney order him to show his hands.
When you were looking at him and you got close to the car, did you notice anything else on the top of the car?
There was a semi-automatic handgun on top of the car.
Was that close to where his hands were on the top of the car?
It was right next to where his hands were on the car.
So you've pointed your gun at him, and Officer Sweeney has told him to put his hands up.
Yes.
Did he comply?
Right away.
What did you do then?
I moved around the front of the car so that I could see the suspect's entire body, so that I ordered him to lay face down on the ground, and I wanted to move into a position where I'd be able to see him when he did that.
Where did Officer Sweeney go?
Officer Sweeney moved around the other side of the car and was checking in the car for suspects, and he told me that there was a rifle case in the car.
At that time, was the passenger door closed?
The passenger door was closed.
When you came around the front of the car, was the driver's side door open?
It was.
So at the point that you get around the front of the car, is the the suspect standing still, or is he laying down at that point?
At the point that I got around the front of the car, the suspect was still standing. I didn't order him to lay down until I had moved to where I would be able to see him after he did lay down.
Why was that?
Well, he was a suspect in shooting in a theater. That he'd been shooting at a lot of people. I didn't want to move him out of my field of vision and give him a chance to go for a weapon or continue the fight.
So do both you and Sweeney get to the driver's side of the car?
Yes.
And then what happens?
After he had checked the car for any additional suspects, I holstered my gun and I handcuffed the suspect.
Wait, is he handcuffed while he was still standing?
No, we got around to, as soon as I got around to the driver's side of the car, I ordered him to lay face down on the ground. And then, so he was laying on the ground, proned out when Officer Sweeney was looking inside the car. And then once he had done that and moved around to a position next to me, I moved forward and handcuffed the suspect.
When you handcuffed him, were you able to tell better what he was wearing?
Yes.
What was he wearing?
He was wearing like a bulky black coat and like a really thin sort of windbreaker material pants. It's the sort of thing that when I used to run track that I would wear to warm up before the actual run.
With regard to the coat, did you notice anything specific about the coat?
When I was searching him right before I handcuffed him, I noticed that it had like a built-in armor, sort of like the armor that like a bullet-resistant vest that I would wear.
When he was on the ground, did he still have the gas mask on?
Yes, he did.
Did he have anything else on his face or his head?
He still had the helmet on too, so he had the helmet and the gas mask on.
Now, when you handcuffed him, did you search him at all?
Yes, when I handcuff somebody that's proned out on the ground, the first thing that I do before I actually put the handcuffs on is I just check I search their lower back to make sure that I'm not moving their hands closer to a weapon before I put on the handcuffs.
Did you search him any more thoroughly than that at that time?
Not before handcuffing him, no. I just checked his lower waistband, or his back waistband, and then handcuffed him.
Once he was handcuffed, what did you do?
After he was handcuffed, I moved him over behind the dumpster enclosure there.
So from the car that's sitting in the last space to, can you point it out for us where the dumpster would be that you dragged him to?
Yes.
So you're pointing in front of that larger concrete area on the map.
Yes, that's it's this concrete and metal enclosure around dumpsters, and I moved him over to the other side of that, so that from the position where I handcuffed him, my back was to the theater door, and at that point I still thought that there may be other suspects, that there may be other shooters, and I was wanting to move him to a position where I could search him with more cover. Where I was, if somebody had come out of the theater, then I wouldn't have even seen them before they could have shot me.
When you got him over to the dumpster, did you do a more thorough search?
Yes.
At that time, did you find any kind of weapons on him?
Yes, he had two knives on him. They were like folding knives. One of them was on his belt and one of them was in a pocket. There was also a handgun magazine that was in one of his pockets, and another one that had apparently fallen out somewhere on that gravelly area where he was initially ordered to lay on the ground.
So the one magazine fell out of his pocket when you dragged him over to the dumpster area.
There was one magazine that fell out of his pocket either when he was proned out or when he was being dragged over to the dumpster area, and there was another one that came out at some point during that search.
So one of the magazines was closer to the car? And
Yes.
is there gravel right next to the driver's side door of the car?
Yes, that sort of looks like a little U shape next to the parking space on the picture. That's a gravelly area, and that's where he was ordered to lay on the ground.
So is that where one of the magazines falls out?
Yes.
And is the other one then in the area in front of the dumpster?
Yes.
Did you know what kind of firearm magazines these were?
I couldn't have identified brand, but they looked similar to what I have for my Glock.
They look to be magazines that you would use in a pistol as opposed to a rifle.
Yes, yes, they were handgun magazines, definitely.
Did both of the knives that you found on his belt and in his pocket, did you discover those when he was in front of the dumpster?
Yes.
At that time, could you tell any better what he was wearing?
Yes, he was, like I said, he was wearing the bulky coat that had some sort of armor in it. He was wearing the sort of windbreaker material pants. It was a really thin material. Underneath those, he was wearing some sort of soft body armor on his legs. And at that point, after I had dragged him over to the dumpster, I had taken off his helmet and his gas mask.
So his gas mask and his helmet were on until you got him to the dumpster.
Yes.
The body armor that you found on his legs, would those be like ballistic chaps?
Yes.
Were you able to do a thorough search of him at that time?
I was, yes and no. I searched him as thoroughly as I could expediently, but there was, given that he was wearing the armor, I really had no idea what was under it. I mean, when you touch armor, it's not like touching other clothes where you can sort of feel what's under there and feel if there's a weapon. When you're touching armor, it's a stiff material that it could hide anything.
Did you take his armor off at that time?
Not at that point, no.
Did you ask him any questions?
No.
Did you hear Officer Sweeney ask him questions?
Officer Sweeney asked him if there was anyone else.
Did you hear the defendant respond?
He said, "It's just me."
Was this after his helmet and his gas mask had been taken off?
Yes.
Once he had said that it was just him, what did you do with him next?
That was, I searched him and that took off the knives and the magazine, and then I put him in there was another police car that had arrived at some point during that search, and I moved him up off of the ground and put him in the back of the car.
Were other officers helping you?
There were other officers that were there. Officer Blue was there when I was putting him in the car. He may have taken another arm while I was...
Was
getting
Officer
into the
Sweeney
car.
still with you?
Officer Sweeney was... Officer Sweeney was still around. I don't know at what point he went into the theater or went... It was somewhere around then that Officer Sweeney continued on into the theater or was talking to another officer.
So the defendant was put into a patrol car.
Yes.
Did a car pull up to where you were by the dumpster?
Yes.
And did that car stay there?
Yes.
Was he put in the back seat?
Yes.
Did anybody get into the car with him or
Well-
stand by the car?
Officer Blue and I were both we weren't actually fully in the car, but he was in the back seat and we were in there putting on seat belts or putting on his seat belt. So we were reaching into the car.
Did you hear the defendant make any other statements?
Yes.
What did you hear him say?
He said, Officer Blue said something to him, and then he said in my apartment. And Officer Blue asked him, he said, like, set to go off? And And he said, if you trip them.
Had you heard the initial question that Officer Blue asked the defendant?
No.
But you heard him say, set to go off.
Yes.
What did that say to you? What did that mean to you?
That we were talking about bombs or some other sort of booby traps.
Where was Officer Blue at the time, and where were you at the time that that statement, unless you set them off or if you trip them, was made?
I was just outside of the driver's side of the patrol car, but like at the back seat, and Officer Blue was over by the passenger side, I believe.
Do you recall Officer Blue checking the defendant's pockets when he was sitting in the car?
Yes, Officer Blue took the defendant's wallet out of his pocket while he was sitting in the car.
And do you know what he did with it next?
He gave it to me.
Did you open up the wallet?
Yes.
Did you take anything out of it?
I took out his driver's license, the defendant's driver's license.
Did anyone ask him, did you look at the picture on the driver's license?
I did.
Did it match the person who was sitting in your car?
Yes.
Did you look at the address on the driver's license?
Yes.
Did anyone ask the defendant about that address?
Officer Blue asked him where his apartment was, or what his address was, and the defendant said that he said it's the one on my license.
Do you recall what that address was?
It was 1690 Paris Street, number 10.
Did he have any difficulty answering that question?
Not at all.
What did you do then with the ID and the wallet?
The wallet I just put in the front seat of the patrol car. I just set it on top of the computer. The driver's license I kept with me until I gave it to Sergeant Files later on.
Now that you had information about where the defendant's apartment was, and with the knowledge of the statement that there is something set to go off if you trip them, what did you do with that information?
I relayed that to other officers, to another sergeant that was on scene.
Was that Sergeant Redford?
Yes, that was.
Would you recognize the person again that you arrested on July 20th of 2012 if you saw him?
Yes,
Is he in this courtroom today?
he is.
Can you identify him, please, by where he's sitting and what he's wearing?
He's at the defendant's table. He's wearing glasses and a light blue button-up shirt.
Your Honor, would you let the record reflect identification subject to cross?
The record will so reflect.
Does he look different than he did on July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
How does he look different?
At the time that I arrested him, he had really unkempt orange hair, and he, since then, he's also grown a little bit of a beard, and he's put on some weight.
What was his demeanor like when you were dealing with him?
When I was dealing with him, he was sort of vacant. He was very relaxed. He was very calm and sort of disconnected.
What did that seem like to you? What did that mean to you?
Sustained. It calls for speculation, too.
Did he cooperate with you?
Yes.
Did he answer questions that were asked?
Yes.
Did he seem confused about anything?
Not at all.
During the time that you were with him, was there ever any change in his demeanor?
No.
Was there anything else about him that you observed?
He was very sweaty. Smelled bad.
Now, he had a lot of armor on, didn't he?
Yes.
Have you worn a lot of armor as a police officer?
I have. Not as much as he was wearing, but yes.
And have you worn a vest in July?
Yes.
And what is it like when you take off your vest?
It's humid. You're very sweaty, and it's like steam coming off of you when you take off the vest finally.
Once he was in the back seat of this car, did you pay attention to him, or were you watching him?
Yes.
Did you stay with him?
I did.
Why did you stay with him?
I didn't want him to escape, and I didn't want at that point the ambulances never really arrived at the back of the theater, so the victims that were being brought out of the theater were just being loaded up into police cars and taken to the hospital. I didn't want a victim from the theater to be put into the same car that he was in. I didn't want him to be taken to the hospital. I didn't want him to escape while no one was paying attention to the car that he was in, so I stayed with him.
What was going on in the back of the theater during the time that he's sitting in the back of a car?
There was the people who were in the theater were being brought out. They were a lot of them were pretty badly hurt. They were being taken to hospitals by patrol car, just because that was the quickest way to get them there. So it was like a racetrack back there with people speeding in to have somebody loaded up into their patrol car and then speeding out to get to a hospital, and lots of blood and shouting, and it was chaos.
Were there a lot of officers behind the theater?
There were.
Do you know how long it was after you arrested him before victims started coming out of the back of the theater?
Not really. I mean, it couldn't have been long, but that section of time for me is really very... It's difficult to track chronologically. I can't really... It seemed like I was there for hours, and logically I know I wasn't, but I can't really give you good estimates for how long things took right around then.
At some point, did you determine that you needed to do a more thorough search?
Yes.
Why was that?
When I was searching him behind the dumpster, like I said, I couldn't feel what was under his armor, and he could have still had anything at that point. When I was putting him in the car, I was already aware that I was going to have to search him again. I just trying to contain him right away, so that the other problems behind the theater, so that the victims could be brought out and evacuated, so that any other suspects that were there could be addressed. I was just trying to contain him right away, and then once the situation calmed down, I thought it would be a better time to do a more thorough search. But after he was in the car for a little while, it was pretty clear that the situation was not going to calm down anytime soon. So I took him out very soon after I put him in to do a more thorough search.
Did you have somebody help you?
Yes. Officer Blue helped me, and at one stage of the more thorough search, Officer Mowry also helped.
So you took him out of the car.
Yes.
Are you still behind the dumpster?
The car was still parked in that same area behind the dumpster. I moved him around to where the dumpster was again, and I made him kneel on the ground, and then I tried to cut his coat off so that I wouldn't have to take off his handcuffs to remove it.
Did that work?
No, there was way too much material in the coat. I was cutting it with a razor, but it was just every cut I would make, it was like there was just more to get through, so that was going to take too long.
So what did you do?
That was, Officer Mowry was moving past us, so I grabbed him and told him to control one arm, and Officer Blue was controlling the other arm, and I took off his handcuffs. I took off the coat and then handcuffed him again, made him lay down on the ground, and took off his boots and his pants, and all the armor and everything. I left him in his underwear and a torn T-shirt.
When you took off all of this ballistic gear, what did you do with it?
Everything that I took off, I was just sort of throwing off to the side, getting it away from him, but not really paying attention to where it was going. I was just getting to a situation where I knew that he was not armed, where I knew that he didn't have any other guns or any explosive devices or anything like that on him.
Once you got everything off of him, what did you do with him?
After that, I moved him back to the patrol car and put him in the back seat and waited with him there until the victims had been evacuated.
Were you still concerned that someone might try to get into the car?
Yes. More the people that were being put in the cars, they were in bad shape. I mean, they weren't getting into the patrol cars of their own volition. These were people that were being carried out. I was concerned that somebody would, not knowing who he was, put one of the victims in the back of the car with him. I actually did stop one officer from doing that because they didn't know. I mean, they were bringing a victim to a patrol car, so I had to tell them that this is the suspect, so they would move on to the next car.
They were looking for any car that was behind the theater that they could use?
Any car, just to get them to the hospital now.
Officer, sometimes your answers are really soft, so I'll ask you to please keep your voice up, okay?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Do you have any sense of how many victims you saw coming out of the theater?
Not really, no.
I mean, a few, a lot, even in that kind of estimation?
It was a lot. I saw a lot of people coming out of the theater. Most of that is sort of a blur for me. A lot of people being carried to cars, a lot of blood, and not a lot of detail.
Did you see a lot of people that to you looked to be very seriously injured?
Yeah.
Overruled?
Yes.
When you were with the defendant, were you sitting in the car or were you outside the car?
I was standing outside the car. He was sitting inside the car, seatbelted, and I was standing just outside the car.
Did you watch what he was doing while people were coming out of the theater?
Yes.
What was he doing?
He would sort of look around whenever a car went speeding past, or when there was something else going on, somebody shouting or something going on outside the car. He would look around. He looked like he was sort of taking it all in, like he was.
Use the microphone, please. Can you pass him the mic? All right. Mr.
Objection, we're
King,
getting into speculation here.
give me just a second. The question was, what was he doing? And so it calls for the witness's observations of what the defendant was doing. I'm going to instruct you to make sure that your answer be limited to what your observations were and not speculating as to what may or may not have been happening, okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. Ms. Pearson?
So you indicated you saw him looking around.
Yes, he would look around,
Okay.
look at the cars as they were going by. Or
Now, was he ultimately moved to a different police car?
yes, he was.
When did that occur?
It was as the victims had been evacuated. He was Officer Irons came and told me that we were going to put him in a different, or that they were going to take him to the police station, and so we moved him from that car to his car, and then they left.
While you were outside the back of the theater, besides the handgun that you saw on the roof of the defendant's car, did you see any other firearms outside?
There was an assault rifle that was over by the exit from the theater.
Was that a rifle that was similar to the assault rifles that you carry as a police officer?
Yes.
When you had dragged the defendant out of the car, take him out of the car for the second search where you took off all of his ballistic gear, did you hear Did you encounter another victim outside the theater that you didn't see?
No, the encounter with the other victim was during the search before I removed all of the ballistic gear.
Okay, during the first search, before you'd put him into the first police car?
Right, after he was handcuffed and when I dragged him over to the dumpster and while I was patting him down there.
When you were near the dumpster, were you aware of whether or not there was a victim located nearby?
I didn't know of one when I moved him over to the dumpster, but then I heard somebody inside the dumpster asking if we were cops.
What did the voice of that person sound like who asked you that question?
Like a teenage girl.
Did you ever see this person?
Not for months.
Did you tell her that you were a police officer?
Yes.
Did you ultimately meet the person who was in the dumpster area?
Ms. Pearson, what's the relevance?
It's a person who the jury will be hearing from in this case. It's part of the story of what occurred.
Well, whether he ever met the person, though, is a different question. If you want to ask him if he ever found out who that person was, I'll allow that, but the objection is sustained.
Did you ever find out who this person was who was in the dumpster area?
I don't know her name.
After the defendant had been removed from the scene in a car, what did you do?
After that, I helped with organizing with separating the witnesses who were inside Theater 9 from the people who were in other theaters. I helped with a canine officer who was sweeping the front parking lot for bombs. I was on a perimeter position for a while.
How long were you at the theater that night? Or do you have any idea when you left? I guess that's a better question.
I think I was there until probably around 9 o'clock, sometime later in the morning, and then I went to police headquarters.
Thank you. I don't have anything else.
Cross-examination, Mr. King?
Good morning, officer.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm well.
You said, officer, that when you heard this call for service, you were at 6th and Laredo?
Yes, sir.
How far away from that theater is that?
Well, I don't know in terms of miles. Sable is 14,500 east. Laredo is 16,100 east. And then the theaters around Alameda, which is 300 south, and 6th is 600 north. I mean, I was several blocks away. I don't know in terms of miles, though.
You were fairly close, though.
It's not a long drive. It would be a long walk.
Or crawl. That would be long.
Yes.
And what you heard over the radio was that there were multiple shots fired at the theater. Is that right?
What I first remember hearing was that there was shooting at the theater. I was doing something else, so I didn't catch the entire call. I just sort of heard that there was shooting at the theater, and then there was information aired that somebody was still inside a theater shooting.
And pursuant to your training, then you attempted to get to the theater along with all the other officers to try to obviously stop that from happening as quickly as possible.
Yes, sir.
And you said, I think, on direct examination that it took you, in your estimation, about 2 minutes for you to get from where your location was to the theater, to the area where you parked in that grassy area off the Sable there.
I said a couple of minutes. I would be hesitant to put an actual number on it because I was just driving fast. I wasn't really marking the time. I was just trying to get there as quickly as I could.
Okay, and I understand that you don't have a stopwatch going or anything like that, but your testimony here under oath was that it was a couple of minutes. Right?
Yes.
To be 2, right?
Perhaps I should say a few minutes. It could have been 2, it could have been 5, but it was around then.
Okay, so it was between 2 and 5 minutes then.
I'm hesitant to put an actual number on it. I drove as quickly as I could from one location to another, but I would have a really hard time being accurate in saying between this and this and giving you that kind of precise window.
When you arrived there at the back of the theater, you parked in that grassy area that you showed us on People's Exhibit 4740, and you, at that point, proceeded towards that corner of the theater there that was near where you parked. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you were running there, I'm assuming?
Yes, sir.
About how far is that grassy area from that corner where you encountered Officer Sweeney and the 2 victims that you saw there?
I would say that I was probably parked, I don't know, I would say around 20 or 30 feet from, maybe a little farther than that.
Okay.
From the corner, but it's, I can't really give you an accurate or a precise answer, sir.
Okay. But your best guess is about 25 feet or so?
Maybe a little bit farther.
Okay. 25 feet, maybe a little bit farther. And as you ran towards that corner of the theater that faces Sable Boulevard there, that's when you saw Officer Sweeney and those 2 victims, and they were located kind of on the sidewalk area there. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you didn't see, there were no other officers you said that you saw in that back area of the theater, correct?
Correct.
Presumably there were officers arriving in the front in response to the call as you were arriving, but in the area you were, it was you and Sweeney at that point in time.
Yes, sir.
And the 2 of you begin to make your way southwest then down the back of that building, and you're following that blood trail, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you're trying to find a way into the theater. You're trying to be, is that right? Trying to find your way in?
Yes.
And you're obviously trying to do this to get there as quickly as you can, understanding you think that there's still shooting going on in the theater, correct?
Yes.
At the same time, you don't know what you're going to encounter, and so you're being somewhat cautious. Is that fair to say?
Yes, we don't know what we're going to encounter. We didn't have a door in mind that we were going to get into, so we're still looking for a way to get in. So we're being cautious, yes.
And as you're making your way down that back wall there, you have your guns drawn, is that right?
Yes.
And you said that, I think you said you were not sprinting, but you're moving as rapidly as you safely could.
Yes.
And at some point, you see a car and a person, right?
Yes.
And the person that you saw was, as you were saying, standing on the opposite side of the car from you, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So the car is parked facing in, nose towards the back of the theater, right?
Yes.
And you are approaching from the passenger side of the car, as it were.
Correct.
And the suspect or the individual that you saw that you initially thought was a police officer was in the door to the car was open, the driver's door, and that person was standing kind of in that open door space. Fair to say?
At that point, I didn't know that the driver's door was open, but yes, given that the door was open, that's where he was standing.
Okay. And you said, that you first thought it would be a police officer, and that's understandable with the gear that the person has on. It seems like you fairly quickly after that, though, it clicked in your mind that this was in fact not a police officer. I'm getting the impression that wasn't a long period of time between when you saw the individual and when you identified that you did not any longer think it was a police officer. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that's a fair statement.
And you said at that point, the reason, or at least one of the reasons that you began to think that it wasn't a police officer is that the person wasn't moving with any kind of urgency, like you all police officers are trained to do in a shooter situation like that. Is that right?
Yes.
The person was just standing there and didn't seem excited at all, correct?
Yes, I would say he was just standing there. He wasn't actively engaged in doing anything. He was he wasn't trying to he wasn't moving towards the theater. He was just standing there.
Right. He wasn't trying to get inside the theater, wasn't running, wasn't moving at all, just standing, correct?
Correct. I mean, I don't want to give the impression that he was like a statue there, but he wasn't. Right. He wasn't moving around or doing anything significant or urgent,
Right. And did you see him move at all out of that? Did he walk away from the car, or did he walk towards the theater, or did he walk eastbound towards where you were coming from, or?
No, he turned his head at one point, and then of course he moved around in response to the orders we were giving him to like put his hands up and to lay down on the ground, that sort of thing.
Sure. But prior to that, you said he's standing there and he's got his hands kind of resting on the hood of the car.
Yes. Well, not on the hood, sir, on the roof of the car.
On the roof of the car. Thank you for the correction. And you said that you held him at gunpoint, and when Ms. Pearson was questioning, you said you estimated that was when you were about 20 feet away from him.
Yes, sir.
Understanding, again, that we can't predict distances with any great precision, but that's your estimate, right?
Yes, sir.
And when you were actually able to get close enough to actually dial in and look at him, you could see that his hands were empty, that there was no weapon in his hands, correct?
Correct. When I first recognized that he wasn't an officer, at that point I could see that his hands were empty.
And you said Sweeney was a little behind you to your left, right?
Yes.
And it was Sweeney that asked him to put his hands in the air.
Yes.
And he did.
Right away.
Right away. And then you moved around the front of the car to where he was located. And at that point, could you see that he was actually in the open door of the car?
Yes.
And at that point, when you're standing there, the little enclosure if you're standing there, the car would be kind of to your front left here, correct me if I'm wrong, and the dumpster area with the enclosure is kind of over here to the right. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's over to the right, and it would sort of like extend towards my front. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, it does. And you could see the exit to what you now know as Theater 9, but the exit is, there's no one coming out of that exit during this period of time.
There's no one coming out of that exit. From the position where I held him at gunpoint, I could see sort of the recess in the wall that leads to the exit. I wouldn't be able to see the actual exit until I moved forward onto the gravelly area where I handcuffed him. That's where I would be able to see the actual door that led into the theater.
At that point, though, your concern was primarily with the suspect and taking him into custody safely, correct?
Well, at that point, I didn't think that he was the only suspect, so it was sort of a very divided concern, which is part of why I moved over to the dumpster. But my immediate action was to deal with the suspect that was in front of me.
And to that effect, you ordered him into a prone position, correct?
Yes, sir.
Face down on the ground.
Correct.
And he complied with your order immediately.
He did.
He didn't attempt to run away at that point or to resist you in any way, right?
No, he did just what I told him to do.
When did you notice that there was a pistol on the roof of the car?
That's tough to say. I don't know if I don't know if it was when he was standing next to the car still or as he was moving away from the car. I just sort of this is one of those parts of my memory of that night that sort of gets tough to nail down. You know, I knew at some point in that area of time that that there was the pistol on top of the car. I don't know if it was when he was standing next to the car or after I moved him away from it.
Okay. And you never moved that pistol or recovered that pistol yourself, did you?
No, I left it there.
Now, you said that that pistol was a semi-automatic handgun, and we're going to talk a little bit more with the jury about this, but that, just to differentiate it, that would be different than like a revolver, for example, like a cowboy gun, right?
Correct. It would be different than that.
And you said that it would be similar, or the magazines that you saw were similar to the Glock that you carry, which is also a semi-automatic handgun, correct?
Yes.
Now, this whole time that this is going on, that you said you patted down the small of his back, you put him in handcuffs when he was ordered to the ground. You never asked him any questions, right?
Correct.
And he never never made any statements to you.
No, I was present for the statements that he made while speaking to other officers, but he and I did not converse.
Now, you said that you obviously were aware of the door there, and that was of some concern to you, and that's why you moved him over to the area by the dumpster to more thoroughly search him, correct?
Yes.
And when you did so, you kind of just grabbed onto him and drug him over there, right?
Correct.
And when you did that, he didn't resist you in the slightest, did he?
No, he did not.
And there wasn't even like a normal muscle tension in his body that didn't seem to you at that point.
No, it was like he was completely relaxed.
Because ordinarily, if you're moving someone around who's in handcuffs or against their will, even if they're cooperating, there's some kind of muscular tension as you move them around. And in this scenario, that was just kind of lacking, right?
Yes, he was just very relaxed, and whatever I did, it was, no tension.
Now, you said at some point, Sweeney asked him, and you referred to this just now, a couple of questions, and you overheard the responses, correct?
Sweeney asked him if there was anyone else.
And Officer Blue asked him.
Yeah, so between two different officers, there were things asked, and I heard the responses.
And
Between two officers, there were things asked, and I heard the responses.
and what he told Officer Sweeney was, quote, "It's just me,"
Yes,
when asked if there was anyone else.
yes.
And Officer Blue asked him something that you couldn't hear, and he said something about his apartment, and then he said in response to Blue's question, like set to go off, he said, if you trip them.
That's correct.
When he said that, his voice was kind of calm and detached, right?
Yes.
And by that you mean that he didn't really, his inflection didn't really convey any emotion to you, like he was scared or angry or anything like that.
Correct. It was just, he was answering the question, not emotionally, just answering the question.
And you said that the wallet came out of his pocket, right?
Yes.
And you asked him what his address was, right?
Officer Blue asked him.
And he responded that it was the address on the driver's license.
He said it's the one on my license.
And that had that 1690 Paris Street address on it.
Yes, sir.
Now, you said that then you escorted him to the patrol car, and in response to Ms. Pearson's questions about what his demeanor was like during this whole period of time, you said that he stared off into the distance at times, right?
He, yeah, I said he was just looking around. Yes.
Do you, and you recall testifying previously in this case, don't you, sir?
Yes, sir.
Do you recall that was a couple times, actually? You recall that you testified at a hearing that was on October 15th, 2013?
Yes.
Do you recall testifying at that time that, this is this is the preliminary hearing. I may have a moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
January 7th, 2013. And counsel, I'm looking at page 40, line 12. Do you recall at that time testifying that the suspect simply, quote, stared off into the distance?
Yes.
You recall that you testified at that time that that the suspect, quote, seemed to be out of it and disoriented.
Yes.
And then again, you testified today that he was sweaty and smelly, correct?
Yes.
And at that time, do you remember that you noticed that the pupils of his eyes were extremely dilated?
Yes, sir.
I have one moment, Your Honor.
Yes. Ms. Pearson, do you have any redirect? All right, it looks like the jury has some questions, so I'm going to ask you to wait for just a moment, okay? Thank you. Would counsel please approach? By the way, folks, while we're having discussions here and I have that annoying staticky noise, background noise, feel free to talk to each other as long as you're not talking about the case and you're complying with all my advisements, okay? All right, the jury has submitted some questions and I have found the questions to be appropriate, and so I'm going to ask the questions of you now. My determination as to the questions being appropriate is based on the rules of evidence and other applicable rules of law. And I should mention that one of these questions was modified consistent with the rules of evidence and other rules of law, and so I'm going to ask it as modified. The first question, which is the question on form number 21, is as follows. You mentioned that the suspect seemed vacant. Just looking for clarification on the word vacant. And so I'm going to allow you to clarify without speculating. So Your answer must be based on your observations and not on guessing or speculating about anything. The question again is, you mentioned that the suspect seemed vacant. Just looking for clarification on the word vacant.
So by vacant, I mean not displaying any outward emotion or any outward sign of real engagement in what's going on.
The next question is, can you demonstrate how he was resting his arms on the car when you observed him? And if you can stand up so that everyone can see you.
Well, it's probably easier if I sit down.
Okay,
So if this
remain
was
seated.
if this was the roof of the car, then it was sort of like he was resting his hands like this. So palms.
The record reflect that he's got his palms down on the witness stand, kind of loosely resting on the top.
I think that's an accurate representation. So the record will reflect that. All right, the next question is, how many people were behind the theater when you arrived?
When I arrived, there was Officer Sweeney at the corner. There were the two people who were bleeding at the corner with Officer Sweeney. There was one person in the dumpster enclosure that I didn't know about, and that's all that I'm aware of at the time that I arrived.
Next, when you say that you made him kneel and made him lay down on the second search, did you ask the suspect or force the suspect down?
It was I was using a control hold to guide his movements, but I was giving him verbal direction as I was doing that. So it wasn't it was sort of a simultaneous thing. It wasn't like I had to force him against resistance to kneel down, but I was guiding him in that direction while I'm telling him, get on your knees.
You may have answered the next question, but I'll ask it anyway. It's a follow-up question to the last question. It is as follows. If you asked, did the suspect respond and or cooperate?
I didn't ask him any questions, but I did give him directions throughout the contact with him, like telling him to lay face down on the ground, or to get on his knees at one point, or to stand up when I was moving him, things like that. And he complied with my directions. I was also guiding him physically, moving him around, but he complied with instructions as I was giving them.
The next question is, while in custody, did the defendant ever say anything to you, and if so, what?
There were the statements that he made to other officers while I was present, but those are the statements that were earlier mentioned. There wasn't anything else that he said to me.
The next question is, why was the suspect kept at the scene for as long as he was? And again, you can't speculate if you know.
I didn't take him from the scene because my car was parked a long ways away, and I was just putting him in a patrol car that was there. The officer that had driven the patrol car there wasn't in the car anymore. All of the officers that were on scene were busy evacuating the theater and getting the suspects, or getting the victims to hospitals. So I didn't take him because I didn't have, my car was a long ways away, and he was contained where he was until somebody else came to remove him from the scene.
The last question is, did anyone in the police contain the white vehicle when you were handcuffing and searching the shooter?
There was nobody in the vehicle to move it. The vehicle had been cleared while I was holding the suspect at gunpoint, and there was nobody in the vehicle to move it. There was there was nobody stopping the vehicle from moving beyond that. I'm not sure if that's answering the question or not.
Okay, any follow-up questions based on those questions, Ms. Pearson? Any follow-up questions from you, Mr. King?
No, sir.
All right, may this witness be released from his subpoena? Any objection?
Judge, we'd actually ask that he remain on our subpoena on call, and we would contact him in the event that his testimony would be needed again.
Okay, so you are subject to recall. Okay, thank you, sir. Members of the jury, it's 10 after 10, and I think it makes sense to take our morning break at this point. I know we haven't gone as long as we usually go, but let's go ahead and take our break. Please keep all my admonishments in mind during the break. They all continue to apply. They all continue to be extremely important. Enjoy the break, and I'll see you back here in 20 minutes. The record should reflect that the jury has now exited the courtroom. Everyone may be seated. I just want to remind counsel to please try to remember to use the microphone when you can. I know it takes time to get used to it, but if you would move it and put it in front of the person who's in charge of a witness, then that person can use it for objections and responses to objections, okay? All right, folks, enjoy the break. I'll see you back here in 20. Thank you.